environmental movement in this country and the movement to make sure that the LGBT community finally had a voice and was represented were young people. And so when sometimes I feel despair, I just see what's happening with young people all across the country and the talent and the voice and the sophistication that they're displaying. And it makes me feel optimistic. It makes me feel as if, this country's going to get better.
And that's former President Obama speaking just in the past hour, offering comfort, hope, and saying there is a change in mindset taking place in this country. We can do better. He made 3 suggestions for police reform, including urging every mayor in this country to review their use of force policies with members of their community and commit to reforms. While he applauded people taking action to make change happen, doctors are warning that these protests, being large gatherings, do pose some risk at a time when we're battling COVID-19. So joining us now to help us understand the potential points of risk and best practices for protesters is University of San Francisco's Dr. Jeremy Howard, also founder of Masks for All. Jeremy, good to see you again.
Hello there.
Well, hello there. I want to make it clear that doctors are not saying people should not protest, right? Many of you are actually very committed to social equity, since inequity is a threat to health. You've always said that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to understand, though, the concerns and protests posed by, I guess, from a public health standpoint, right, by these protests.
Sure. So really, from a public health standpoint, if a protest kind of goes well, if there's not things like tear gas and jailings, it needn't be a huge problem. Outdoor transmission is much less common than indoor transmission. It's something somewhere between 20 times and 300 times less common. And furthermore, in the Bay Area, everybody's wearing masks, which really dramatically decreases the chance of transmission. So you shouldn't feel like going out to protest is putting you or your community in a necessarily unsafe position.
That is good that it is outdoors. And you're right, from the videos that we've seen here in the Bay Area, at least, can't say that for every city across the country, but we see mostly mask wearing. Talk about why that's extra important in a protest environment when you do have shouting going on, right? Why you really need that mask.
Yeah, so when you wear a mask, a few things go on. The key thing to remember is the chance that you're going to infect somebody else in case you're sick and you don't know it is all about how many of your droplets they end up with. And so you have this germ cloud around you, and that germ cloud increases in size if you're talking loudly even more, if you're yelling even more. If you put a mask on, the size of that germ cloud dramatically decreases, and the amount of viral particles in it also dramatically decreases. And so that's going to mean there's much less chance of people around you getting sick. Same idea then to keep yourself from getting sick. Stay out of other people's germ clouds. So keep your distance, especially if they're not wearing a mask. And don't stay next to somebody you don't know for an extended period of time, for more than a few minutes, because the longer you're around them, the longer the chances that you're getting infected.
I do see that happening, though, even here in the Bay Area, with people standing very close, certainly not the 6 feet. I also want to ask you, though, when there is tear gas used, and that's happened in some of the cities here in the Bay Area even, what does that do? Because I would think that if people are tearing up or they're coughing from it, that could increase the chances that they're touching a point of transmission, right?
Right. Well, it's not so much the touching, it's the droplets. So tear gas is explicitly designed to mess up the respiratory system, and so it creates more droplets. It causes you to cough. That's what it's meant to do. But of course, remember, when it comes to safety, it's not just about respiratory safety. In fact, it's, you're not likely to die from tear gas, but you can get seriously injured if you get hit by one of those canisters. So, it's not just about covering up with a mask, but please wear eye protection, both for COVID-19, but also for those gas canisters. Wear a bike helmet or any kind of helmet. There's a lot of great guides available online about how to keep yourself as safe as possible in a protest. And we hope that it's not going to come down to that, but it's good to be careful.
Helmet's a great idea. Tyler asks on Twitter, should goggles be worn for airborne virus, tear gas, and rubber bullets?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. So eye protection is super important. If you don't have goggles, maybe you've got ski goggles, or maybe you've got a pair of sunglasses, something to cover your face. If they get, we've already seen 2 journalists who've lost an eye in these
Yes.
protests. So yeah, do what you can to keep away from projectiles, from gas, and cover yourself up as best as you can.
Selena wants to know, why do people still need to social distance when people are rioting without masks? This is ridiculous. Do you worry a little bit about the message that on the one hand, there is support for people, strangers being really close to each other in large groups, and then how does that look to the people who are saying just stay home?
Well, I mean, a lot of protesters are doing a great job of social distancing. Not everybody is. And so the fact that some people are being less safe about this doesn't mean it's okay for you to be unsafe as well. It also doesn't mean that they don't have a right to protest. So what we're saying is be as safe as you can for yourself and for the people around you. Try to stay away from people you don't know.
Right.
And unfortunately, not everybody is going to follow that advice.
Can I ask you, what are the things people should consider when they decide for themselves whether or not to go to a protest in terms of their own circumstance and who they live with and their health conditions?
Well, it depends a lot on where you are. So in the Bay Area, we've been extremely fortunate and had a lot of good planning and good implementation, which means that in the Bay Area, the number of people that are sick with COVID-19 is much, much, much lower than many other parts of the country. So the basic risk profile isn't that high. But if you or your family has comorbidities, if you're looking after people who are older, then obviously you're going to be putting them a lot more at risk if you're going to be out in public close to other people that are yelling. Potentially there might be tear gas and so forth. So in the end, it's a personal decision that you have to make.
Look, if there are more transmissions, more cases because of the protests, how long before we see that bump in numbers?
Generally speaking, it's a couple of weeks in terms of cases and about 4 weeks in terms of deaths. I think, really the things that can be done to avoid that happening, though, there's a lot that the police can do. So in particular, don't arrest people and throw them in jail overnight. You're going to be putting a lot of people in close quarters. This is something similar to, in a different way, to what happened when lots of people started flying back from Europe and they all got thrown into these kind of immigration areas for 3 hours. And there was a lot of super spreading events happening there. So if the police and the powers that be can kind of avoid using tear gas, avoid putting people in jails, allow people to protest peacefully with distancing, with masks on, then hopefully, we can all get through this reasonably safely.
All right, Jeremy Howard, appreciate that. Don't go too far away because we're going to have another conversation now, one that I want to bring you back to later on. So hang tight. We're going to take a short break on the air, and then when we come back, we'll talk about sports, specifically the future of high school sports. We'll show you a risk ranking of the sports, the different ones, and talk to a local athletic director who says football practice is about to begin, in fact, next week. So stick around.
We're in commercial break.
All right, Facebook friends, glad you're with us today. Do we pause in our conversation with Jeremy? Okay. Okay. Jeremy, how are you? So good to see you again. Yeah, those were great points that you made.
I spoke to my friend Zeynep Tufekci before I came on air, who has spent a lot of time running into protests around the world. So she gave me lots of advice from firsthand experience.
Fabulous. No, that was all really good advice. And, I was thinking about in terms of the people who might have, whether they have respiratory issues, is that something they should consider? And not just the COVID concerns, but sometimes I think being in a crush of people that could happen could also have a negative health impact on some, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also people could, make sure that they bring along a container of water with a teaspoon of salt that's been shaken into it. That's really helpful for washing out with a saline solution, washing out tear gas from your eyes.
I've heard milk too. Does that help?
I've been told that saline solution is the recommended.
Hey, what's up, Steve? Steve, are you getting on Zoom right now? We need you. Hello? Did Sabrina send him a link?
45 seconds.
Folks, what I'm doing right now is checking in on my next guest to say, where are you? I need you to get on Zoom. So these are some of the things that happened during commercial break. See, people are getting a peek behind the curtains right now, Jeremy.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. 30 seconds, but I'm not nervous because I've got Jeremy here. So I'm not nervous.
All right. Sorry about that.
Hi, Steve. Are you there?
Yeah, Kristen, I'm here. Sorry about that.
Jeremy, can you mute your mic? Mute your mic. Thank you.
10 seconds.
That was my bossy side.
Okay.
Okay, but Eric, we don't bring Jeremy in until the next block, right? C block? Okay.
1. Cue.
All right, welcome back. Many of you have wondered whether high school sports are going to happen this fall. This week, there are moves in that direction. The governing body of California High School Sports, CIF, is finalizing its guidelines for the return of sports. Meantime, some schools in San Mateo County are getting ready to start workouts next week. Joining us right now to talk about it is the football coach and athletic director of Aragon High School in San Mateo, Steve Sell. Hey, Steve.
Hi, Kristen. How are you?
Good. You appreciate the color I'm wearing today?
Absolutely.
All right, just full disclosure here. Aragon's my alma mater. Our colors are red and black. Steve, you were the quarterback of the football team when I was there. So we weren't friends then because you were too cool for me, but we're friends now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I played baseball also. So it was, yeah, but I think now you are the person that's that's by far the big shot right now.
I don't know about big shot. I'm happy to be in this position, be able to share with you and have you share with us your insights. And you're also vice president of CCS, that's the Central Coast section. So you help shape policy for all sports from San Francisco down to Santa Cruz County. So I'm curious to find out, right, if there are plans to have spectators, for example, when you guys do start in the fall, whatever sport might be. What do you think?
So I would say right now that spectators are not high on the list of priorities. And talking with the athletic directors and superintendent and other people in the section, the main focus is on the student athletes and getting the kids out there participating. If we could, I think I speak for everybody else, that if we could have athletes participating in the fall, even without spectators, that we would consider that a win. The real is really on the kids.
Right. After all, it is about the kids first and foremost. So Aragon is part of the San Mateo Union High School District, which announced athletes could start workouts next week, right? So is it just football? I know you're the coach for football, but is it just that sport, or are other kids coming back to do workouts too?
No, not at all. And it's all the sports. We had a meeting yesterday with the coaches. And most of us in our school district have strength and conditioning programs. And one of the greatest developments, since you and I went to high school, is the prevalence of girls doing power lifting right along the boys. And so, the strength and conditioning programs in our district are focused all across the sports. And we have not equal number. I can't speak for the other schools, but it's for all sports and both boys and girls.
Mm-hmm. All right, tell me about, for example, the football drills. How will that work? Nothing face-to-face, no touching?
Yeah, so we will, and we're following the county guidelines that you have to work in pods or cohorts, is to use their terminology, of 12 or fewer athletes with one coach. And they will be separated 6 feet apart. And there's just body weight type lifts they could do. They could squat their own body weight. They could do push-ups, sit-ups, and a variety of plyometric exercises that will get them in shape to compete in athletics. And those type of drills can be done across all the sports. And so that's what we're looking at doing, at least for the first couple of weeks of that session.
All right. Steve, I want to talk more about those practices in the summer coming up. But first, this is really interesting, so I want to bring that up and show it to our viewers. You, and not just you, but really a lot of the athletic directors have come up and worked out a chart that gives a risk ranking to each high school sport. Can you walk us through what a score or 4, 5, 6, 7, what that means?
Yeah, so as I just for clarification, the athletic directors in our district and some of the Sequoia districts have been collaborating on some different models. This was something I put together with my trainer based on some NFHS guidelines and other information. And I shared it with the athletic directors in our district and Sequoia district, and shared it with my own coaches. So I don't want anybody to think that this has been vetted or approved by any board. This is just a bunch of or myself trying to get out ahead of this and try to come up with a plan and some numbers that would hopefully give our superintendents some solid footing when they go to their relative school boards and ask that we have some type of athletics next school year.
Right. And I just want to mention to folks, the lower the number, the higher the risk. And so when you see a high number, like for golf, tennis, cross country, swimming, those are actually the safer sports. And Steve, you based it on a few things. I know one is elimination of droplets. The other is elimination of surface transfer. And this is where I also want to bring Jeremy in, just so he's a researcher and he can also help in terms of offering some guidance on droplets and such. So talk about that. Why is football, for example, higher, or wrestling in terms of, eliminating droplets? How does that worry you, and how do you contain that?
Well, and that was when and if you looked at the chart, we talked about the ability to eliminate or reduce it. And it would be hard, for instance, to, without changing the complete nature of the game, to eliminate the potential to exchange droplets in the sport of football because of how close the players are to each other. Wrestling is another prime example. Basketball is a prime example. Versus a sport, say like swimming, where kids are in their own lanes to begin with, but then instead of teams alternating lanes like they do now at a meet, a team can have lanes 1 through 3, have lanes 4 and 5 blocked off, and then kids in lanes 6, 7, and 8. Most people have 8-lane pools. So it was just, that calculation was, what sports have the ability to reduce the droplet exchange, spread of the droplets.
All right.
I'd love to hear what Jeremy has to say, because we can use all the information that we can gather.
Yeah. Hang on. Before you answer, Jeremy, I'm going to ask my producer, do we have time to go right now, or do we have to take a short break? Okay. Gentlemen, we're going to take a short break, continue this conversation over on our live stream platforms, and then come back on air with more.
In commercial break.
All right, Jeremy, I got to say, that sounds like a great idea to me, like in terms of assigning a risk number, in part on eliminating droplets, right? Good approach?
I think this looks great. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Really cool, really
Steve
proactive.
Did go to
I love
Aragon, so I have full faith in him. But what are the things that you gentlemen think can be done to eliminate surface transfer? For example, I assume that means shared equipment. My daughter plays volleyball, and it's touched 3 times on each side before it goes over to the other side again. How could you begin to eliminate surface transfer? Any ideas, Jeremy?
I'd say don't worry about it too much. There really isn't any documented cases of surface transfer. It's something that people used to think was a big problem, but if you look at the CDC site now, they say that they do not consider this to be a significant source of transmission, and I agree that's what this evidence suggests. So I would focus on avoiding droplet transfer, and luckily that's easier to do because I don't know how to play volleyball without touching things.
Steve, does that make you happy to hear that?
Yeah, no, and that's great information. That's kind of what I thought the most important thing was the droplets, because of the different thing we're hearing about the surface. And part of the difference in the surfaces, whether indoor, and I'd love to hear what Jeremy has to say about this, is part of the calculation was whether sport was indoors or outdoors. And my basic understanding is that if there's a couple of 800-meter runners trying to pass each other, and they're breathing on each other neck and neck, that exchange of droplet is not that much less significant. If there's 2 wrestlers wrestling, is that somewhat accurate?
9, 8,
Sorry.
Wait, hang on. We're coming back on air.
Okay.
4, 3, 2.
All right, and we're bringing together and bringing back Aragon's Athletic Director Steve Sell and USF's Dr. Jeremy Howard to engage in an eye-opening conversation and share ideas for how different sports could be done safely in the fall and why some are tougher than others. Steve, during our break on the Facebook platform, you asked a really interesting question. If you could pose that again and have Jeremy answer that.
So my question was, as we're talking about the exchange of droplets, which from what Jeremy has said and what I've read also is that the focus is more on the droplets being transmitted more so than surface. And we were, in discussions where we were making a big difference between indoor sports and outdoor sports, especially when it comes to surface transfer. But if we're focused on droplets, my question to Jeremy was if there's a couple 800-meter runners or 1,600-meter runners neck and neck, fighting for position, breathing very close to each other, is that, due to the fact that they might be outside, is that any less risky than two basketball players and two wrestlers who are right up in each other's face, guarding each other?
I would think so, right? What do you think, Jeremy?
I would be very careful about indoors, for sure. I mean, indoors transmission rates are between 20 times and 300 times higher than outdoor transmission rates. And so I would be nervous about any kind of sport indoors. Now, of course, things like a big gym where you play basketball or badminton, they're huge, but they don't necessarily have that airflow going through that's getting that kind of germ cloud pushed out of the way. So I'd be pretty cautious about that. In general, the studies you're seeing about the efficacy of things like masks tend to assume that people are just talking, not that they're yelling at their teammates, not that they're doing heavy breathing. But you're right. If people are running around a track and field venue, they're right next to each other for 3 minutes, there's no breeze, they kind of have a traveling germ cloud going on, and that could certainly be problematic. So you kind of have to use a bit of common sense here. If something is inside, as much ventilation as possible. Any amount of airflow helps a hell of a lot. If you're outside, try to be thoughtful about how to minimize the amount of kind of exchange of the same space. So if you are doing badminton, for example, maybe don't change ends at the end of every couple of games. Try to keep people separated and keep them separated.
One of the things we were talking about is badminton was playing singles only, because doubles people are right next to each other.
Right.
And spacing out the courts.
Okay, gentlemen, we only have a minute left, but Steve, I got to ask you, are there even discussions temporarily this year changing some of the rules of the game? Don't banish me for saying this, but what if you have flag football instead of tackle?
Right.
Is there talk of that?
I'll say this, everything's on the table. And I'm just hoping that everybody keeps open minds, and that, the assumption was that if we're still distance learning in the fall, that we can't have sports. I would argue the opposite, that you need to have kids connected to the school. I think all educators agree on that. And if there are some sports that we can do, as Jeremy mentioned also, that we can do those safely, I would encourage that we do the sports that we can.
All right, Steve, I got to say, I know you well enough to know that you wouldn't bring the kids back and say, go ahead and do it unless you thought it was safe. And I know you're racking your brains to come up with safe ways for kids to be able to engage athletically in this coming school year. So thank you. Best to you. And Jeremy, thank you so much. Always a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate your input.
This was a lot of fun, gentlemen. Great conversation. We got to do this more. All right, we're going to take a short break on the air, but our conversation with Jeremy and Steve continues for a couple more minutes over on Facebook Live right now.
In commercial break.
Steve, you need to be my co-host sometimes. You ask great questions.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's funny. We've been, like kind of in the middle of football season when all you can think about is X's and O's and your next opponent.
Yeah.
This has just been for the last, I don't know how long, we get new information, like the information about transfer. That has changed. That information has changed. Now it's focused on droplets, and how can you modify certain sports, make sure they play. Like cross country, for instance. Cross country, usually you start in a pack, and there's a way you could do dual meets only where you stagger the starts and you are running strictly against the clock. And
kind of like rally car racing.
yes.
I love that. That's right. Hey, can I squeeze in one last question from a viewer? Sharice wants to know, what would you recommend for gymnastics, especially bars? I did hear you, Jeremy, say that surface transfer is not a big point of transmission. The numbers don't show that. But gymnastics gyms tend to still be closed right now. Gentlemen, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, that makes sense to me because it's an indoor environment where people are doing a lot of heavy breathing. So there's a lot of droplets coming out, germ clouds appearing. They're not really going to disperse unless they've got great ventilation. So, yeah, gyms make me a little nervous, I must say. It's hard to exercise with masks on, and masks don't work great when you're breathing super hard.
Sure. And Steve, when I was at Aragon, I did gymnastics, but now, of course, it's not offered as a high school sport anyway. People do it in private gyms. Steve, last question, which is, do the signups so far show an impact on the numbers? Are fewer kids signing up because of COVID worries? What do you see?
So it's a little too early to tell. I mean, we're getting a lot of, we had the information, we put out the information to the incoming ninth graders, and I'm getting about the same amount of emails about signing sports. People have a lot of questions.
Thank you. Out of time. Got to cut you off.
Okay.
Good to see you. And welcome back. ABC7 is hosting a live hour-long conversation on the issues of race tomorrow at 4 p.m. You can watch ABC7 Listens from Anger to Action, a Bay Area conversation about race, equality, and the path forward. It's a full-hour conversation with an expert panel of guests. That is tomorrow at 4 o'clock right here on ABC7, moderated by ABC7 News anchor Eric Thomas and ABC7 News anchor Kumasi Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every day at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. So I'll see you tomorrow. All right, Facebook friends, thank you for joining today. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Bye, Steve. Go Dons.